Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
It wasn't the ideal start to an election campaign. Less than an hour before Boris Johnson got the election underway, news came through that the Welsh Secretary was resigning. Alan Cairns quit when it became clear he'd endorsed an aide, even after knowing about the man's role in the collapse of a rape trial. Now, speaking outside Number 10, the Prime Minister said a Conservative win would mean getting Brexit done. A contrast, he said, to the horror show of dither and delay under Jeremy Corbyn. Here's our political editor, Laura Koonsberg.
He may have waited his life for this, but is he ready for what waits? A cacophony wherever he goes. A leader who irritates but can inspire.
Good afternoon.
A risk taker asking for you to put faith in him.
Our MPs are just refusing, time and again, to deliver Brexit and honour the mandate of the people. I can tell you, I've got to the stage where I've been wanting to chew my own tie in frustration, because, in a sense, we're so nearly there. Thank you all. Thank you.
Forget Parliament, Boris Johnson has problems inside. Scratching his head nervously yesterday, Alan Cairns, the Welsh Secretary, who quit today over claims he knew a former member of his staff sabotaged a rape trial. The traditional exchange of letters at a non-traditional time. The first day of a Prime Minister's campaign.
And if I come back here with a working majority in Parliament, then I will get Parliament working again for you. On day one of the new Parliament in December, we will start getting our deal through.
Boris Johnson's offer, though, is to bring a close to these torrid times, at least an end to part one. But can he be the one to extend a credible invitation to every voter?
Come with us, a government that's putting billions into education. Come with us, a government that believes in high wages and is raising the living wage. Come with us, get Brexit done and take this country forward. Or, and this is the alternative next year, spend the whole of 2020 in a horror show of yet more dither and delay. Let's get Brexit done and unleash the potential of the whole United Kingdom. Thank you very much.
The Prime Minister has said time and again he doesn't want this general election, but he's made the calculation to risk it all. If he wins, a victory would see him back here and us leaving the European Union in January. But lose, he'd become the third shortest serving Prime Minister in history, and Jeremy Corbyn would be on his way to moving into Number 10.
I welcome Jeremy Corbyn.
For 4 years, his ranks of supporters have dreamt of him walking through Downing Street's door. Like his rival, he wants to move on from the mess.
Westminster hasn't exactly covered itself in glory recently. You're right to feel frustrated with the political system, because it's not working for you. Politics should be about your life, your community, your job.
But on what to do instead, their solutions are different, very different.
If the British people elect a Labour government on the 12th of December, I will be proud to be a Labour Prime Minister. But I have to warn you, it will be very different, because I was not born to rule. None of us in this room were born to rule. The politics that I stand for is about sharing power and wealth with people who don't have a lot of money, don't have friends in high places, so they can take control of their own lives.
Mr. Corbyn and Mr. Johnson have 36 days to persuade you that they are the one who deserves the car, the glide to the palace, and then to power. This ritual, unchanging. The Times, anything but. Laura Koonsberg, BBC News.
Well, let's now speak to our Wales political editor, Felicity Evans, who first broke that story about the Welsh Secretary. She's in the Vale of Glamorgan, Alan Cairns' constituency. Felicity, how will this resignation of Alan Cairns affect the campaign in Wales?
Well, George, I think you have to say that that campaign is in some disarray this evening because as Welsh Secretary, Alan Cairns was supposed to be leading that campaign and there is no obvious candidate to replace him in that role. Of course, Mr Cairns says he's done nothing wrong and that the inquiry into his behaviour will clear him, but undoubtedly a resignation at this point will damage his electoral prospects and potentially those of his party. The Conservatives had hoped to gain seats, particularly in Leave voting areas in the northeast of Wales, and what we simply do not know at this point is how this row over the selection of a candidate for the Welsh Assembly elections, a candidate who it emerged had been accused by a judge of sabotaging a rape trial, will affect voters' decision making. But what we do know is that the victim has spoken of her distress that not a single senior Welsh Conservative has apologised for selecting that candidate, who has now been suspended. And there's another thing the party will have to grapple with too, and that is that the questions over who knew what and when do not go away with Mr Cairns' resignation.
Felicity, thank you very much. Well, over the next few weeks, we're all going to be bombarded with pledges and promises from all the parties. Today, as we saw, Mr Johnson said the Conservatives will finish Brexit and then invest in public services. But what does it mean for you? Our Deputy Political Editor, John Pienaar, has been listening to some of the questions people have been asking.
Can Boris Johnson deliver Brexit?
Well, of all the main parties, he's the only leader who'd take Britain straight out of the European Union if the Tories win outright. No more referendums, no more wrangling over the withdrawal agreement. That's the terms of divorce. Just out. He had a deal and he couldn't get it through Parliament. If most MPs were Tories, he could. But there's the question, what kind of Brexit? Boris Johnson has said there'll be no more extensions. He's also said he wants to break out of the European Union like the Incredible Hulk, remember? And if no comprehensive trade deal's agreed, that's our long-term future relationship, after another tough round of negotiations, we could still face the disruption of a no-deal exit next December.
As a mum to a young daughter, my question to the Conservative Party: what are you doing to our schools and to public services in general?
The Tories are promising to spend more. Who isn't? But Boris Johnson's moved onto Labour territory by promising he'll end austerity and pour cash into hospitals, schools and the police. It's worth noting that the extra £7.1 billion for schools in England, that's about reversing cuts and keeping pace with growing school rolls. The extra money for the police, it'll recruit another 20,000 officers in England and Wales. But it'll rebuild forces that were cut under the last Tory-led coalition government. And as for the NHS, an extra £34 billion a year eventually, that's a lot of cash. But again, the health service needs it, just to meet growing demand and the rising cost of healthcare.
I just wanted to know, what does the Prime Minister mean by come with us?
He means trust me, not the other guy, and that's for you to judge. No party leader can be called hugely popular or trusted just now. Boris Johnson broke his promise to take Britain out of the EU, do or die, by October the 31st. Political opponents say you can't trust his word. Even some Tories have their doubts about his command of detail, for example. Yes, he was a popular London mayor, but that was before Brexit split the country. His party decided he was the one most likely to win. Right now, his personal poll ratings are well ahead of Jeremy Corbyn's, but polls can change. And that's one reason why this could be as personal, maybe as nasty an election campaign as any we've seen.
John Pienaar reporting there. Well, let's talk to Laura Koonsberg now, and she's in the West Midlands. Laura, we got a pretty good idea of how Boris Johnson wants to play things, but that resignation today, well, that certainly wasn't in the script, was it?
Absolutely not, George. And we've looked back through the mists of political history and we cannot find another example of a serving cabinet minister resigning on day one of a crucial election campaign. And it's absolutely not the backdrop that Boris Johnson would have hoped for when he'll launch his campaign in front of crowds of supporters here in the West Midlands in a couple of hours' time. And there's no question, to have such a toxic issue be a problem for the Conservative Party at the very start of the campaign is something that they really would have chosen to avoid. But that said, remember, campaigns take place over what can feel like a very, very long time. This is like an injury when they've just got out of the blocks, but this really will be a marathon, certainly not a 100-yard dash. And also for a long, long time, it was always said that campaigns didn't really shift much at the beginning. Most people had made up their minds. Well, look at recent history of how campaigns have moved and moved very dramatically. A lot of Conservatives I've been speaking to are haunted by the memory of 2017, where they started out way in front, dreaming of a huge majority. That is not the case this time, because things can change and they can change very fast. We'll see whether the Prime Minister has anything more to say on that on the stage in a few hours.
Laura, thank you very much. Well, let's take a look at some of today's other election news. SNP leader and First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon, has said demand for a second Scottish independence referendum will become irresistible if her party wins the majority of Scotland's 59 seats. She said it was her intention to have a referendum next year and says the idea of Westminster politicians rejecting a second vote is starting to crumble. The Liberal Democrat leader Jo Swinson took to the campaign trail on an electric battle bus with the slogan "Stop Brexit, Build a Brighter Future." She visited a mental health charity in North London, saying her party would pledge £11 billion to mental health services funded by a 1 pence rise in income tax. The Green Party in England and Wales has said December 12th should be the climate election, arguing the future wouldn't get another chance. Launching its campaign, the party called for additional borrowing in order to fund £100 billion of spending every year for the next decade to deal with the climate crisis.
We know these are dark times. It's easy to fear the future. The threat of Brexit hangs over our heads. The climate emergency rages from the Amazon to the Arctic, and our fragile democracy is under attack. But despite all this, Greens don't fear the future. We are the future.
Green Party co-leader Sian Berry there.
After the phony war, the election campaign finally got underway today, but not quite in the way that Boris Johnson would have wanted. Just as he was preparing to speak on the steps of Downing Street, the Wales secretary resigned amid claims that he had lied over what he knew about an aide who sabotaged a rape trial. It helped to overshadow the Prime Minister's message that he would deliver Brexit and unleash the country's potential. Paul Brand reports on a difficult first day for the Conservative campaign.
Gliding into Buckingham Palace this morning, a rare moment when things were running smoothly. Boris Johnson is the Queen's 14th Prime Minister, here to tell her he hopes to remain that way. Emerging after a few formalities, his visit here was just a courtesy ahead of a campaign likely to contain very few. Returning to Downing Street, where, despite the spring in his step, he announced the start of a general election he claims he's been dragged into.
Good afternoon. I don't want an early election, and no one much wants to have an election in December, but we've got to the stage where we have no choice because our Parliament is paralysed, it's been stuck in a rut. I've got to the stage where I'd be wanting to chew my own tie in frustration.
And if the election's been sparked by deadlock, he claims he's the man to unlock it.
And this is the alternative next year: spend the whole of 2020 in a horror show of yet more dither and delay. Let's get Brexit done and unleash the potential of the whole United Kingdom. Thank you very much.
It's barely 3 months since Boris Johnson first walked through that door, but the next 5 weeks will decide whether he remains here as Prime Minister or becomes the shortest lived in 200 years.
But others had already been shoved aside before campaigning had begun. The Welsh secretary forced to resign after endorsing a candidate who'd collapsed a rape trial, telling the Prime Minister, "You will be aware of allegations relating to the actions of a party employee and candidate for the Welsh Assembly elections in the Vale of Glamorgan. This is a very sensitive matter, and in light of continued speculation, I write to tender my resignation as Secretary of State for Wales." There are still calls tonight for Jacob Rees-Mogg to follow him.
Mr Rees-Mogg, do you really think Grenfell residents lacked common sense?
Yesterday, he was forced to apologise for suggesting so.
Do you think the past 24 hours is a record to be proud of?
Well, clearly there are things that have happened over today that none of us would have wanted to happen, and people have apologised for offence that they have caused.
The Conservatives could really be sorry, given the easy attacks from Labour.
I'll tell you what's common sense. Don't put flammable cladding on people's homes. That is common sense.
Tonight, the Conservatives are preparing for their first rally. But whatever they print on the T-shirts, the past few days may have already tarnished their branding.
And Paul Jones is now live from that event in the West Midlands. So, Paul, how is the Prime Minister going to get his campaign back on track then?
Well, Mary, I've known the wheels to come off a fair few campaigns, but never for a cabinet member to fall off with them. In fact, we think this is the first time a cabinet member has resigned during a campaign, certainly on the first day of one. Downing Street trying to play it down tonight, telling me, look, Alan Cairns is hardly a household name, but this all adds to that sense of chaos in the Conservative campaign, and the Tories are effectively colouring in the very picture that Labour are trying to sketch of them, of a party run by the elite, out of touch with the people. Boris Johnson will try and get back to his core message tonight at what looks like a pretty big rally here in Birmingham. We know he's a good campaigner, we know he can work a crowd, even a tightly controlled one like this. But the tone of a campaign is everything, and so far the Conservatives have got off on the wrong note.
OK, Paul Brand in Birmingham, thank you. And Paul will be covering the Tory campaign over the next 5 weeks as they travel around the country. So let's catch up with our other correspondents, with Labour, the Liberal Democrats and the Brexit Party. And we'll start with Romilly Weeks, who's been following Jeremy Corbyn and is in Macclesfield tonight. Romilly.
Well, Jeremy Corbyn is at his third event of the day, speaking right now at this hall behind me here in Macclesfield, putting in the hours, even though he's been gifted something of a dream start by the Tory party. He hasn't addressed directly the Tory party's problems today, beyond underlining how horrified he is at the Grenfell Tower comments. And it's not just that the Tories have started badly, it's also that Labour has so far shown itself to be pretty focused and disciplined about its message. And the message today from Jeremy Corbyn was about leadership, that he would be a very different kind of leader, not driven by ego, and one who would let others play their part, which, given that his personal poll ratings are so particularly dire, might be the best way to pitch it.
Well, the Liberal Democrats chose to start their first official day of campaigning here in Golders Green in North London. Jo Swinson even managed the obligatory photo opportunity with a baby, 3-month-old Sam, whose mum recently defected from Labour to the Liberal Democrats. Here they're hoping to win votes with the large Jewish community, some of whom feel that Jeremy Corbyn hasn't done enough to tackle anti-Semitism. On top of that non-stop anti-Brexit message, today the focus was on mental health. Jo Swinson visited a mental health charity where she said that the Lib Dems would invest £11 billion, ensuring that mental health illness is treated with the same urgency as physical health problems. The rub, it would be paid for by an increase on income tax.
The Brexit Party leader Nigel Farage is about to address a rally here in Carlisle this evening, but he was in Workington in Cumbria this morning, home of the fabled Workington Man. That's political shorthand for a Labour supporter who voted Leave in the referendum in 2016. And these are prize voters that Mr Farage is after, along with Boris Johnson and Jeremy Corbyn. Mr Farage describes that assessment of that type of voter as a load of patronising cobblers, but his campaign, his plan to field 600 candidates across the country, no joke for the Tories. And Nigel Farage confirmed to me that senior pro-Brexit Tories have been in touch with him, trying to convince him to discontinue his campaign. No sign of Nigel Farage budging so far. He says he's fighting for a clean break Brexit.
OK, Angus Walker in Carlisle, thank you. Elsewhere, the SNP leader Nicola Sturgeon has restated her desire for a second vote on independence next year. She was speaking as she campaigned in Alloa. She said if her party won the election in Scotland, it would make the demand for another referendum irresistible. And the Green Party launched their campaign in Bristol by calling for £100 billion a year to be spent on tackling what they call the climate emergency. Their co-leader, Sian Berry, said the party was pro-Remain, but that other policies were more important.
Some things are even bigger than Brexit. This must be the climate election. The future won't get another chance.
So much for oven ready. It all feels pretty raw for a first day of campaigning, as Boris Johnson urged voters to come with us, launching his party's election campaign on the steps of Number 10. He's already compared Jeremy Corbyn to Stalin and of siding with Putin, but the Tory campaign has been somewhat overshadowed by a series of scandals and gaffes. So can the main course make up for the hors d'oeuvre? Our political editor, Gary Gibbon, has this.
Barely 100 days in Downing Street, and he's off to the palace to roll the dice. Boris Johnson was also chancing his luck, tweeting talk of the Queen from his limo on this most political of days.
I still have to see Her Majesty the Queen, which is always a very tough interview because she always asks the best questions. And the question is, why are we having this election? There's only one reason. I'm afraid that Parliament is paralysed.
But even as they were getting Downing Street ready for his election announcement, news was breaking that the Welsh Secretary had resigned from the Cabinet. Alan Cairns had quit over allegations he'd covered up his knowledge that a former aide was accused of sabotaging a rape trial. Boris Johnson ignored the latest blow to his campaign messaging and focused instead on parking the blame for the election elsewhere.
Good afternoon. I've just been to see Her Majesty the Queen earlier on, and she agreed to dissolve Parliament for an election. And I want you to know, of course, that I don't want an early election, and no one much wants to have an election in December, but we've got to the stage where we have no choice because our Parliament is paralysed. It's been stuck in a rut for 3.5 years, and I'm afraid our MPs are just refusing time and again to deliver Brexit and honour the mandate of the people. I can tell you, I've got to the stage where I'd be wanting to chew my own tie in frustration because, in a sense, we're so nearly there.
His next promise left several senior economists scratching their heads.
And if we can get this deal over the line with a sensible majority government, we certainly can, then we can release that pent-up flood of investment. Hundreds of billions are waiting to pour into the UK, and we can inject a surge of confidence into our system.
But even the big numbers didn't distract from the big news that the longest-serving cabinet minister had resigned at the worst possible time and over very serious allegations. Alan Cairns is accused of knowing more than he later admitted about how a former aide had collapsed a rape trial with a statement to court that was condemned by the judge. Mr Cairns said he wanted to stand again for Parliament. He is tonight under pressure to reconsider that. Jeremy Corbyn, campaigning in Telford, hinted that this latest setback for the Tories pointed to a difference of character between the two main parties and their leaderships.
I will be proud to be a Labour Prime Minister, but I have to warn you, it will be very different. It will be a very different way of doing things. Because I was not born to rule. None of us in this room were born to rule. I don't pursue the kind of politics that thinks it's all a game, a parlour game, a debating society game. I want to seek power for our party in order to share that power out all across the country.
We'll dive into a couple of Year 9 classes.
Lovely.
Jo Swinson, the Liberal Democrat leader, went hunting for votes in the Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab's seat, Esher, in Surrey, which Mr Raab won in 2017 with a 23,000 majority over Labour.
Liberal Democrats are fighting this election to win so that we can stop Brexit and create a brighter future for Sam and for everyone.
In Workington, Nigel Farage crossed paths with a critic.
And a rugby club's a really good gauge because you've got people who are like cleaners and don't have jobs, right through like company directors and things like that. And the people in there thought that they were wanting to take back control. They thought it was about Islam. They thought it was about things that it was nothing to do with at all, right? And you're just trying to profit from that. It was about politics of fear.
Independence.
But we're not independent, are we? We'll never be independent.
Well, not with you. If you're in charge, you won't, will we? No.
He was also challenged by some of his own party faithful as to why he dumped the Brexit Party candidate here overnight.
I feel I deserve an explanation why Phil Walling was replaced.
The thing, look, parties chop and change candidates. We chopped and changed candidates.
Tonight in Birmingham, the Prime Minister will address his first campaign event, hoping his message can now start drowning out the mistakes by his own team.
Gary Gibbons there. Well, the former Welsh Secretary, Alan Cairns, is thought to be the first cabinet minister in memory to resign during a general election campaign, promising to cooperate in full with an investigation into his actions and insisting he was confident he would be cleared of any wrongdoing. Our Home Affairs correspondent, Andy Davies, has been looking at the background to Alan Cairns' resignation.
Alan Cairns with Boris Johnson during the Prime Minister's leadership bid earlier this year. The third Prime Minister to appoint Mr Cairns to the Cabinet.
Now, after 3 years as Secretary of State, Alan is now, I think, the grand old man of Welsh politics.
Today, he is the talk of Welsh politics as his ministerial career implodes amidst a chorus of criticism. His resignation involves this party worker, Ross England, a man who last year was accused of collapsing the rape trial of a friend of his. Mr England maintains he did nothing wrong. But after making a claim in evidence about the complainant's sexual history, something she denied, the judge reportedly said England had deliberately and single-handedly sabotaged the trial. It prompted a retrial in which the defendant was convicted. Alan Cairns denied knowing about this when he later endorsed Ross England's candidacy for the Welsh Assembly. And yet BBC Wales yesterday said an email they'd seen addressed to Mr Cairns last August suggested otherwise. Silence ensued from Mr Cairns, and then today he resigned, in light of the continued speculation, he said, adding, "I will cooperate in full with the investigation under the ministerial code which will now take place, and I am confident I'll be cleared of any breach or wrongdoing." The Welsh Conservatives issued messages of gratitude. Opponents called for him to stand down as an election candidate too.
He hasn't provided answers to the questions that were being asked of him yesterday. Those questions still need to be answered, and I think there will be a judgment then that people in the Vale of Glamorgan will make as to whether or not this is a person they wish to see representing them.
She walks in our hills.
We asked Alan Cairns' office if he was available for an interview, but we didn't get a response. So Alan Cairns has yet to give a full explanation about this. He hasn't been doing interviews, and opposition parties here are saying this is far from over. Ross England, incidentally, has been suspended as an Assembly candidate and as a party worker, and the leader of the Welsh Conservatives today said he found this case shocking and disturbing and expected the highest standard from Conservative Assembly candidates. But of course, it was only on Monday that we were reporting the apology of another Conservative candidate, the parliamentary candidate for Gower, Francesca O'Brien, after online comments she'd made in 2014 were made public, in which she referred to people she'd been watching on the programme Benefit Street as people who, in her words, needed putting down. One Welsh Conservative source tonight said to me they hope to bounce back from this, but right now it's a disgrace. To have started the election campaign in this way is an absolute disgrace. It's a car crash.
Andy, thanks very much. Stay dry. Well, a short time ago, I spoke to the Business Minister, Nadhim Zahawi, and I started by asking him if the Conservatives are to blame for not delivering Brexit by withdrawing their deal from Parliament last month.
Well, that's not quite true, because you, Matt, are a great expert on Parliament, and you will know that, and you see it, by the way, because Labour have not denied it. They're saying that their policy is to negotiate a deal with the European Union and then vote against their own deal. So no matter what the Prime Minister would have brought back, they would have voted it down.
But
and
you
that
don't
was the
know
real
that.
problem.
You didn't even put it to the test. You chickened out.
Matt, that's their policy. This is their manifesto now. They're saying that whatever deal that they will actually attempt to negotiate, I don't know how, then they'll vote against it. What Boris has done is said, look, I have to unblock this blockage. I can't have more dither and delay.
But you keep talking about dither and delay. It is the Tory party that called the referendum back in 2016. It is the Tory party then got rid of one Prime Minister and got another Prime Minister, who then decided to call an election that she didn't quite win, and now you're calling another election. So I'm afraid dither and delay has been on your doorstep, not anyone else's.
Well, Matt, again, with respect, you're sort of slightly revising history there. Yes, it was the Conservative Party that called the referendum, but all the other parties agreed. Indeed, the Liberal Democrats and one Nick Clegg of now Facebook fame actually had a pamphlet, a leaflet through every door with his face on it saying we have to have a referendum. That was the Liberal Democrats' policy back in 2016. And then you say about having a Prime Minister removed. Well, Theresa May tried her best to get her deal over the line when she couldn't get her deal over the line.
But it was your party that voted it down.
Not only our parliamentarians.
If your party had voted for, let's be honest, if your party had voted for her deal, you'd now have a deal, but it didn't.
Well, first of all, Jeremy Corbyn refused to actually get to a place that he can actually vote for the deal, and she tried her best. So
are you not going to take responsibility for anything that you've done in the last 3 years?
Of course we are. That's why we're going to the country, Matt. That's why we're saying we have to trust the people, because the people will understand that 2020 can be a great year where we invest in 20,000 more police officers, where we invest 34 billion in the NHS, where we invest 14 billion in our schools, or two referenda.
Alan Cairns, the Welsh Secretary, resigned today because of alleged lying in connection with this rape trial. Now, should he still be standing as a Tory MP?
Yes, he should. I've known Alan. We were the same intake in 2010, so we've served together for almost 10 years. I'm confident that the people will feel the work he's done in his own constituency and in Wales is, I think, demonstrably of the highest quality as a member of Parliament.
But this is a man who was sorry to interrupt. But this is a man who was accused of lying, who's resigned over these allegations. You know, many people would say he's not fit for office. Why should he be fit to stand as a Tory MP?
Because one, if you read his letter, Matt, he resigned because he says, I need to clear my name.
Well, you can spend the next 4 years doing that, or 5 years.
And I'm confident that I can clear my name. Well, we live in a country where rule of law is important, and you are condemning a man
I'm not condemning
when he's
him at all.
saying, I'm confident I can clear my name.
But I'm just wondering whether he's the right man, you know, to stand in an election that is all about accountability and moral probity.
Well, absolutely right, and the voters will make their decision. I think they will decide to back Alan because he's been such a great local constituency MP and a very fine cabinet minister.
Okay, then now the other gaffe, Jacob Rees-Mogg has apologised for his comments about the Grenfell victims. But does it not show that he is completely out of touch?
So, Matt, first of all, Jacob has absolutely, unreservedly apologised for what he quite rightly felt were insensitive remarks. But my question to you and to your viewers, Matt, is have you never misspoken in your life? No human being, I think, can
many times, but I'm not running for office. I'm not running for public office.
I don't disagree
the highest
with you.
Public office.
I don't disagree with you, but we all are human and we make mistakes.
I think this is a particularly grievous mistake for the victims of Grenfell. And I think it's wrong. You know, you can't lump that mistake with other mistakes.
He has unreservedly apologised for his mistake, and he has been very, very upfront about it, and he has regretted what he has said. Look, ultimately, no apology is good enough for the innocent souls that lost their lives at Grenfell. We've had the first phase 1 of the inquiry. We owe it to the victims that we deliver on the recommendations of phase 1 and then carry on into phase 2 of the inquiry and deliver on those as well.
Nadine Zahawi, thank you very much.
Well, in the light of Jacob Rees-Mogg's comments and the apology which followed, we asked a group of Grenfell survivors and relatives to come into our studio to give their reaction. First, here's a reminder of what Mr Rees-Mogg said.
If either of us were in a fire, whatever the fire brigade said, we would leave the burning building. It just seems the common sense thing to do.
I just wondered what you felt when you heard Mr Jacob Rees-Mogg suggest perhaps that Grenfell residents didn't quite have common sense on the night.
I believe it's kind of like insult to the people who gave their life. There's 72 people died, and there's lots of family who are suffering, and a person who more educated turns up and says something, kind of like, you know, it hurts a lot. So we're still running with the pain every single day, and that really hurts.
He apologised quite quickly. Does that make any difference?
Well, if someone, I don't know, I feel kind of like, you know, someone slap you and turns back, you know, and says sorry and apologize, does it make any difference?
The hurt is still there.
The hurt is still there, you know.
Paulus Tekel, you lost your son Isaac in the worst possible circumstances. I wonder what you felt when you heard Jacob Rees-Mogg said it had perhaps been an issue about common sense, that people should have ignored the fire brigade.
We were stuck inside. We don't know how the fire looked like outside. So in my circumstances, a trusted authority person with a uniform, he came and advised us to stay. Next to him, the only person we believe, we trust is after God is him. Our life is not the same. It's really damaged. But especially say kind of things from hierarchy person saying this is really painful.
Maher Kuder, what do you think? What are your thoughts? Does it matter what he says?
No,
is that the issue for you?
I'm disappointed from person. He's in his position, and the people give him his voices. When the fire happened, my wife and my kids, they left. My wife, she wanted to stay with me to go to use the stairs because it's too hard for me to get down from 9th floor. Look, the lift is not working, it was out of service, and my wife, she get down, she spoke with the firefighter, and she told them, my husband, he's disabled, he's in crutches, he needs help, he can't do it. They asked her to leave the building and stay outside the building. She stayed outside, and my daughter, she wrote my flat number 64 on the lobby, on the wall. She told my father, you're waiting there. If I waited for 10 minutes more, 15 minutes more, I'm not with you now today.
So you feel very lucky?
Yeah, very, very lucky, because I make it by my own. I damaged my back. I fell twice on the stairs when I get down from 9th floor, and I damaged my knee as well.
Sepida, you also feel very lucky to have escaped with your child.
Yes, I'm one of the luckiest one, which I left in the 1st floor. Because I came, and that time I used to have a crutch. And I just came out with my son with that crutch. If I was on top floor, I lived in top floor, I never could come out with my son.
Paulus Tekel, I mean, for you now, is it important, would you like to see Jacob Rees-Mogg resign, or are there other issues that you think are unresolved?
Our issue is there is a failure of a firefighter on the night, and Danny Cotton is still on her job.
It was a very difficult moment for all the families, wasn't it, when Danny Cotton said she wouldn't change a thing?
Yeah, I
on
was
that
there
night.
in the inquiry when she gave her statement. I want to listen to her. She said, when the speaker man asked her, if you come back to that night, did you change the decision? She said, no, I left straight away. I left the inquiry straight away. I don't want to continue to listen to this lady.
We are fighting for our own, I don't know, for justice. As we say, we're supposed to be with our family right now, not running around, doing the interviews, doing the press conference. Because we will not listen, so we have to fight for our own rights.
We feel they don't care about us.
Still?
Still, yeah.
Jackie talking to the Grenfell bereaved and survivors.